This is part 2 of our notes on the age of imperialism. Today we'll be talking about the Spanish-American War. And again, I apologize for the poor quality of these notes, but the important thing is that you hear them, that you understand a little better what the unit is about. Okay? So here is a quote from the Washington Post, which is a very important newspaper even to this day. It says, "We are face to face with a strange destiny. The taste of empire is in the mouth." Washington Post, 1898. And if you remember, up until this time, America was just minded its own business. It's followed the Washington's advice of not getting involved in foreign affairs. But now there is this war about to happen between Spain and America. All right? So here's some causes of the Spanish-American War. First of all, humanitarian causes. There were concerns, there was harsh treatment of Cubans by Spain. At this time, now this war is not going to take place so much, it's not about Spain, it's about Cuba. Because Spain controlled Cuba, which is an island about 90 miles south of Florida in the Caribbean Ocean, and or in the Atlantic Ocean, I'm sorry, part of the Caribbean Sea. And Spain controlled that, and they treated the Cubans very harshly. They treated them as slaves. Another very important aspect, and probably the main aspect of the Spanish-American War, is a term called yellow journalism. This is very important that you know this. It's sensational telling of events by newspapers. The New York Times and the New York Post and the New York Journal, they were all in competition to sell newspapers. This was the only way people got information back then. There was no television, no radio, and so the only way people knew about news was to buy a newspaper. And so the different publishers would print stories and put big headlines that would grab people's attention, so their paper would be the one that a person would select to buy. And so they got into competition, and they made every story more sensational, more interesting. Sometimes they weren't very careful with the truth, and they told a lot of made things very sensational, and they made the events going on in Cuba sound very, very serious, and maybe even perhaps bigger than they were. Okay, and so the United States had an economic interest in Cuba. We traded with Cuba. We got a lot of raw materials from Cuba, and it was in the United States' interest to make sure that Cuba stayed free to trade and that the people there were treated well. All right, so here's some more causes. The publication of the Delome letter, which called President McKinley weak. Lately, people are even think perhaps the Delome letter was even a fake, because the journalist wanted us to get involved in the war. But there was the Spanish, I believe he was the Spanish ambassador, and he wrote a letter which was intercepted by American dignitaries. And he said that President McKinley was too weak to do anything about the way Cuba was being treated. Now, that letter was published in order to make President McKinley kind of say, wait a minute, I'm not a weak president, and you better believe I'm going to do something about this. So by calling him weak, it kind of forced him to prove that he wasn't weak. And then there was an explosion and sinking of the USS Maine in Havana Harbor. Okay, and now we think that, as a matter of fact, just the last year or so, they have pulled up the wreckage of the Maine, and it looks like it was an implosion, that there was actually engine trouble, and that's what caused the ship to sink. But at the time, Spain was blamed for sinking our ship, the USS Maine. It was an American ship, and it was off the coast of Havana, Cuba, and the Spaniards were accused of sinking it. So when there was an agreement could not be reached, President McKinley asked Congress to intervene and get involved with the Cuban interest. Okay, The war was fought in the Caribbean and the Pacific and the Philippines, which is interesting. Spain also controlled the Philippines. It was not fought in Spain, or it was not fought on American soil, but it was in the Philippines and Cuba, which are two islands on opposite sides of the globe. The U.S. fleet of ships or of warships defeated the Spanish at Manila Bay in the Philippines. Theodore Roosevelt, who we studied a little bit last time during the Progressive Era, this is before he was president now, he joined a group called the Rough Riders, and they were a troop in Cuba, and he and the Rough Riders charged up San Juan Hill in Cuba, and they took that hill for the Americans. They placed an American flag there, and then other U.S. forces captured Guam and Puerto Rico, which are two other islands, right? As a result of the war, Spain quickly realized they could not defeat our U.S. Fleet of ships, and so they've ceded all of this territory to us. So the U.S. annexed or got control of the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Guam, okay? Cuba became a virtual U.S. protectorate, which means that even though the United States did not control Cuba, we agreed that we would protect Cuba. And that was under the Platt Amendment, which allowed the United States to intervene anytime there was problems in Cuba. Okay, so this is, I'm sure you recognize Florida, and then there's Cuba, the Dominican Republic, and Puerto Rico, okay? And Guam is an island on the other side of the globe near the Philippines. All right. Why the war is considered a turning point, right? Remember I said before this, America was isolated. It didn't get involved in other affairs, but this made America a world power because it ended the Spanish colonial empire in Americas. Remember, we wanted, sea to shining sea, and we did not want European influence anywhere in the Western Hemisphere, in North America or South America. Well, when this happened and Spain gave us those territories, Spain is no longer controlling. France and England had long left control of any of the islands or any area around the United States. And so we now controlled the Spanish former colonies of Cuba, Guam, and Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. And this allowed us to portray our naval strength around the world. If you remember in yesterday's notes, the part 1's notes, we talked about Alfred Thayer Mahan, and he wrote the book, The Influence of Sea Power Upon History, and this showed how powerful we were. Here's a political cartoon. If you remember, I told you it's very important to be able to interpret political cartoons. Here we have the American eagle, and if you notice, he's spreading his wings all the way across the globe, from the Philippines all the way over to Puerto Rico. Right, and that will do it for today's notes. Part 3 and 4 will be coming soon to a Chromebook near you.